Welcome back to our special series called Secrets from the Via Dolorosa. We're walking with Jesus as he headed toward Jerusalem, toward his crucifixion, toward the cross. Along the way, the land itself will give us a lot of insight to some of the best-known stories in the Bible. These are secrets from the ancient past. Thank you again for joining us. You know, Jesus began talking about the cross with his disciples when he was more than 100 miles north of Jerusalem. So if the phrase the Via Dolorosa means the way of suffering, then Jesus was walking his personal Via Dolorosa even as he left Caesarea Philippi, the last known location we know of in the northernmost reaches of Israel, as he headed straight toward his own execution in Jerusalem. And though Jesus knew the cross was why he had been born, it must have been a very emotional journey to realize he was on that last stage of life headed toward the cross. It was perhaps like someone who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness. You know, from the moment the news is delivered of such devastating news, every day is special, every day is important, and every day brings you one step closer to the end of your life. With that in mind, watch how Jesus takes this path to Jerusalem, because the path he chose for himself is actually going to teach us some things about the message that he had for the entire world. You know, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. His ministry had been centered in the heart of a Jewish community along the northern shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. Every town in that area had a synagogue, and mostly Jewish people. The synagogue in Capernaum, the very large synagogue in Capernaum, is where the ministry of Jesus had been based. But as Jesus left Mount Hermon, where the transfiguration probably happened, he first healed a child at Caesarea Philippi. Now, that may have been the most pagan town in all of Israel during his lifetime. Caesarea Philippi was home to the gates of Hades. It had a long and repulsive history of pagan worship. There were no synagogues in Caesarea Philippi or anywhere in the northernmost reaches of Israel. It was completely pagan territory. There were pagan temples built to honor mythological gods, and at least 2 temples that had been built to honor the Roman emperor as if he were God on earth. And yet there was Jesus bringing hope to a pagan people who desperately needed hope. When Jesus returned to his very Jewish community in Galilee, again bringing his message of grace there, he actually seemed to be more frustrated than ever with his own people. Now remember, Jesus had already spent something like 2 years with his primarily Jewish audience. Great crowds had followed Jesus all along the way, sitting around the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee, listening to his sermons. Thousands of people had been healed by Jesus. But in the last few months of his life, Jesus seems to have run out of patience with anyone who wasn't completely committed to following him. Now, according to Luke's account, Jesus began saying no to more and more people who claimed that they wanted to follow Jesus. One of those people who said, "I'd like to follow you, Jesus," said, "However, I'd like to take some time to bury my father." And Jesus said no. He didn't have time to wait on a man who wanted to bury his father. Now listen, was that a rude reply? Here's yet another secret the land has waiting for us. When a person died in Israel while Jesus was living, his or her body was bathed, wrapped in cloth, and laid in a tomb on the same day the person died. Often the tomb was a cave, many times with a movable stone protecting the entrance to the cave. 1 year later, family members would return to the tomb, gather the bones of the deceased loved one, and place those bones in an ossuary. The deceased person could then rest with his fathers, because there would be other boxes on shelves in that tomb with the bones of his ancestors. So if the man's father, the man who wanted to follow Jesus as long as he could take time to bury his father, if the man's father had just died, he would not have been in a conversation with Jesus. He would have been busy with all the details surrounding the immediate burial of his father. On the other hand, if he wanted to clear all of the, let's call it this way, legal paperwork of settling an estate, to wait on that 1 year anniversary before following Jesus, to wait until it was convenient to follow Jesus, Jesus simply didn't have the time. He was already walking the Via Dolorosa. Every step Jesus was taking, even in the Galilee region, was taking him closer to Jerusalem, closer to the cross. He acted like a man who was running out of time. He acted like anyone who knew that he or she didn't have much time left. There was an urgency to every message, to every discussion, to every decision. And I promise you this, there were no accidental decisions in that last season of life for Jesus. So when Jesus took his disciples again into Samaria, people knew it was intentional. You can't accidentally go into what we would call forbidden territory. He had begun in the pagan region of the north, returned to the very Jewish region of the Galilee, and now was going on one final tour through Samaria. The ethnic and social differences between Jewish people and Samaritans were so profound, Jewish people usually did not travel through Samaria. Some considered it dangerous, and yet Jesus had not hesitated to go into Samaria. He had met a woman by a well on one well-known trip near the modern-day town of Nablus. By the time he and the disciples left that village on that trip, the Samaritans there had become followers of Jesus, and the disciples had learned an important lesson about the value of people who were different from them. Now, on other journeys, Jesus had visited the cities of the Decapolis, all of them heavily influenced by secular Greeks. They were cities planted by Alexander the Great. He had also visited Tyre and Sidon, two cities far removed from the more comfortable Galilee region in both distance and in culture. It was as if Jesus was spending this last important, urgent walk of his life, headed to the cross, emphasizing to his disciples that he had not come only for the Jews. He had also come for the Greeks, for the Romans, for the pagans, and for the Samaritans. Whoever would believe was welcome to have eternal life. Now think also of the power that this would have on the Jesus movement in the first few years after the crucifixion and resurrection. Those same disciples and the other followers of Jesus would scatter from their Jewish homes to Samaria, to Africa, Asia, and Europe. They would all go into all of these very different areas with the message of the good news. They called it their gospel. Within a few decades, this movement, now called Christianity, would be moving faster than ever, soon to become the world's largest religious group. And think about it. On his last journey to Jerusalem, Jesus had been training his followers to go everywhere with this message, even into Samaria, even to the pagan areas, and of course to the Jewish areas. Now, by the time Jesus and his disciples reached Jericho just a week before the crucifixion, Jesus was the most popular rabbi in all of Israel. Jesus would go up to Jerusalem from Jericho. He would enter the city on a donkey as if he were a new king. People thought he was going to be a king, but even in Jericho, Jesus was trying to convince his followers that it was a different mission for which he had come. And in this mission of salvation, he had come for everyone. Instead of having lunch with his adoring followers, and there were hundreds of them, he instead told Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector, that he would be having lunch with him. As people grumbled, Jesus ate lunch. And as Zacchaeus basked in the grace offered by this most unusual rabbi, he had a total change of heart. And it was an expensive change of heart because Zacchaeus also promised to pay back anyone he had wronged, and apparently he had wronged a good number of people in Jericho. I think this is why the message of Jesus still resonates with hundreds of millions of people, even billions of people today. Because grace is available for everyone. Though it's available for the Jews, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, it's not just for the Jews, it's for everyone. And grace isn't just for good people. It's for those of us who know deep inside that we don't deserve it, that we're sinners, that all of us have sinned and fallen short of God's glory. We don't deserve grace. But for Jesus, you've become a follower, you'll understand quickly that grace has nothing to do with how much money you make or what your reputation was like before you met Jesus, or even if you've managed to avoid prison time. Grace is simply a gift from God. But in order to provide this priceless gift, Jesus would have to endure the crucifixion. And so he left Jericho knowing that his execution was waiting for him in Jerusalem just 18 miles away. There are so many more lessons packed into this journey. I've written a book called Secrets from the Via Dolorosa, and I'd love for you to have a copy. It'd be a powerful way, I think, for us to get ready for this year's remembrance of the crucifixion and, of course, our celebration of the resurrection. If you'd like to have a copy of this book, just follow the link in our website, secretsfromtheancientpast.com, or experienceisraelnow.com. I want to thank you again for joining us today. Next week, we will be in Jerusalem. The first person we're going to meet there, it's a woman Jesus saved from a horrible execution of her own. I'm looking forward to sharing that story with you, showing you how the land has incredible messages for us, even in that very familiar story. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. I'm Andy Cook.